Hi, I'm Beth from Sew Country, and today's tutorial is going to be something new that I haven't done on my channel. I'm going to be quilting a bag today. Now, I got my start in quilting. That's how I first learned sewing, is by doing some basic steps and by quilting. But I didn't really enjoy it. It wasn't until I found bag making that I really just fell in love with sewing. I met the owner of Sassy Sunflower last year, and while talking to her, I was really impressed with her knowledge, her quality, her supplies, everything she had on display. And so I knew I wanted to try to kind of get back in it a little bit. Not like making quilts, but using the skills of quilting in bags. Well, she told me and explained that she had kits specifically for that. You can order these online from her website, which is what I did, but these are also in your local quilt shop. I think they're in over 100 different quilt shops all over. So there's actually a feature on the website where you can click to say find in my local quilt shop to see if it's somewhere local to you. For me, I just went ahead and ordered, and I got these 2 half packs. So what these are is there's 5 half-yard cuts in each half pack plus a pattern. There is, I think, 9 different patterns you can get. Some of them are quilts, but I wanted to choose the tote. I'll probably sew up this one on camera because the colors are brighter and the contrast will help you to see better. So I made my first Tippy tote. I was really surprised at how easy it came together. The pattern's really easy to understand. It's simple to follow. It does take a little bit of cutting work, but honestly, the cutting, the piecing, that's the slowest parts. The bag comes together really quick. I'm going to be sewing this one up on camera. You have 5 fabrics in this kit. The first thing you have to do is you have to designate which fabric is which. By that I mean if this is fabric number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, and 5. That's the first thing you do. After you decide which fabrics are which, then the pattern tells you, oh, you cut fabric number 1 this way. You cut fabric number 2 this way, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to start cutting out my 5 fabrics. When I come back, I will show you the different stacks. Like, okay, here's fabric number 1 and number 2, and then we'll start sewing it together. After I get my 5 fabrics cut according to the pattern measurements, then I will come back and we'll kind of talk and actually start sewing. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll start on our Tippy tote. I have everything cut out, and I want to kind of explain a couple things. Of course, I'm not going to give you any kind of measurements because that is what is listed in the pattern. But the first thing you do, like I was saying, is you separate your fabrics into your 5 groups. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then after you do that, the pattern tells you fabric 1 and 2, you cut this way. So let's kind of go through it, even though it may be a little bit confusing. Let's try to go slowly. So for my fabric 1 and 2, it is going to be the red with the small flowers and the green with the multicolored flowers on it. This is 1 and 2. 1 and 2 fabrics get cut the same way. So the first thing you do is you pull out those 2 pieces and you cut these very long pieces. We're going to actually sew these right sides together and then cut again, and this is going to become our lining. So this is going to be your lining pieces. So you have those 2 cut. After you cut these pieces out, the pattern tells you to go ahead and start cutting out these. Every time you cut a fabric, after you cut out the main pieces, it tells you you will cut the rest of it, the remainder, into these same size rectangles. So you can see I have all different colors in here, all different prints. We will sew these together, and that will make up the front, that'll make up the handles. So you can see this huge stack, but you will not have to use all these in your bag, just so you know. So my fabrics 3 and 4, that is going to be this plain green and this white with the red squares. And then you cut this from 3 and 4. And then that would bring me to my last piece, this number 5 piece. And so you can see I have 2 pieces cut here with it, and I haven't ironed anything yet. That is the 2 pieces you cut with 5. But these are the pieces that we have. We're going to go ahead, I'm going to press everything out a little bit, and we're going to start sewing everything up. And I'll show you how we're going to sew each thing, but
Of course, I'm not going to sit here and sew all of these together on camera because that would be a waste of everybody's time. First thing we're going to sew is the fabric, the very long cut from fabric 1 and 2. You're going to sew it along the long edge. So what you do is you put these right sides together. Now, fortunately, in these kits that she sells, they're going to be non-directional. That is one less thing you have to worry about. So you're just going to place them right sides together. You'll match up at the short edge and the long edge. Then what you'll do is you'll use the seam allowance that's given in the pattern, and you're going to sew all along this long edge. This is the first thing we will sew. After we get through sewing this, what we'll do is we will press the seam, and then you're going to cut this pretty much in half. The pattern gives you the exact measurements. I won't be cutting on screen because I do not use a ruler on screen, but you will cut it in half, and this will become your lining pieces. I personally am going to interface this with an SF-101. The bag maker of me cannot not interface. You don't have to, but this is what I'm doing. So I'm going to sew this first. Okay, I have it sewn all along that long edge, and what I will do is I will take this over the iron, and I'm going to press my seam to one side. I'm going to use my cutting mat, rotary cutter, and cut this into 2 pieces according to that pattern measurements, and that will be the lining. So this is what your lining panel should look like. You'll have 2 of these, and you'll have different colors on the top and the bottom. You can interface it if you want, but that is optional. I'm going to choose to interface it just because I prefer that feel. So I'm going to set these aside while I work on everything else. I'm going to pull out this stack of pieces. The pattern tells us that we're going to go ahead and sew 9 of these together, and we're going to sew them along this longer side. This is going to end up being part of the exterior. I think it's a top band if I remember correctly. I don't worry about how I place them together. I'm just grabbing them as I see them because you can't get too worried about particulars or you're just going to get exhausted. So I don't have none here, but I have started the pieces. What you do is you take one of these and you place it right sides together, and then you're just going to sew along that long edge with the seam allowance in the pattern. I sewed one of these. Let's open it up, and then we will go ahead then and grab another one and just place it right sides down and sew it in the same way until we get 9 of these across. But then after you do that, you repeat that and make another strip with 9 pieces as well. After I get those sewn, I will come back and show them to you. The remaining stack, after you sew up those, you're then going to sew these pieces together along this short edge. After you have that sewn along this short edge, you'll just have this long strip of your pieces sewn together. The pattern gives you a measurement of how long, and you will cut out 5 strips with that measurement to have 5 different pieces that will help make up your exterior. I'll show you everything. I know it's a little confusing to understand, but I wanted to talk to you about that because I'm going to be doing most of this stitching off camera. So I'll do this off camera and then I'll come back to show you all these steps done. This is that top strip. These are the pieces that we sewed against those longer edges. There is 9 rectangles here sewn together on the back. You can see that I did choose to press my seams open. It's just something I typically like to do, but I will go ahead now, lay this piece out. The other strips that I sewed along the short side, the ones that we sewed like this all together, I cut those. The pattern tells you how long you cut them, but basically you're going to come to where they'll fit with this top strip. Now what you'll do is you will just orientate it there at the bottom. This is the top, and you're going to have 5 of these going to be making up the exterior. So this is what it'll look like. I'll take this first side and I'll put it right sides together and sew it. Then I'll flip it open and then sew another one. But what I want to talk about is how we kind of stagger these seams. So you can see where the seams are here. We don't try to match up the seams whenever we add this next row. What we'll do is we'll just kind of offset them a little. Doesn't matter how much, as long as it is going to be matching up on the sides. We will trim this down. I will attach this to foam. This is how we're going to construct that front exterior and the back exterior. They'll both be constructed that same way. They're going to end up the same size as your lining pieces. So you will keep sewing these right sides together and then pushing them flat. We're not top stitching, we're just ironing them flat and just offsetting each of the seams. So let's go ahead and start with one, and we'll do the same for the other side too, but I just want to show you how I do one and then we'll do the rest off camera. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make for sure I follow the seam allowance. Once you sew those two pieces right sides together, what you'll do is you'll flip it down, and I'm going to go ahead and take her the iron and iron it flat before I sew on the other one. You don't have to. You could sew them all at once if you wanted to. That is your preference. But you will continue on in the same way, making sure you offset the seams. You don't want to try to line them up just so it'll look better and just kind of more organic. But do this for your front and the back. 5 of these strips down on top of that top band. So I have my exterior ready to go. At the top, you'll see those B pieces that are sewn together against the long side, and then here at the bottom, we're going to see the B pieces again sewn together, but this time they're at the short edges, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strips of the B's sewn short sides together. The pattern tells you how big this should be. You'll have to trim it down just a little, and then you will make sure you kind of iron everything. I pressed my seams open, but you could definitely press them to one side or the other. It's kind of your preference on that. I did go ahead and attach mine to foam. So I have a fusible foam. I fused it on there, and then the next step is to quilt. I'm not a big quilter, so you can choose how you want to quilt. You can quilt in the ditch here, which means you're going to stitch in each line, or in some of the lines. You don't stitch in all of them. You could do different types of quilting where you quilt from one diagonal to the other and just make kind of chain stitches. You can do that same thing up and down. You can do free motion quilting where you're stitching in a design. So many different options for quilting. There are templates, but there's also just ways you can draw on the stitch lines and then quilt over them. That is the next step to do. You will quilt both of these pieces for your exterior. The rest of the B pieces I have, let me pull those out. I'll save the rest of these B pieces, and that'll be what I use to help me create the handle of this bag. So I'll set these aside, set my exteriors aside, and we're going to go on to our next step. I'm going to grab out my 2 E pieces. Your E pieces are going to be cut from your fabric number 5. So I have these 2 E pieces. Let me just show you what mine look like. That is the print on them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these right sides together and sew along this long edge on both the top and the bottom. We're going to leave the short sides unsewn because we will turn it through there, and that'll just create a tube. That'll give us a finished edge for the top and the bottom, because this is going to be our interior slip pocket. We don't care about the raw edges on the side because they'll be sewn into the seam allowance, but we do want finished sides on the top and bottom for our pocket. I'm just going to sew these together with the seam allowance given the pattern. Now that we have those 2 pieces sewn together, we're just going to flip them right sides out. I will take this over to the iron and give it a real good press before I attach it to the lining. I have the interior pocket pressed flat. Now the pattern doesn't tell you to top stitch, but I always like a top stitch on a pocket, so I'm going to go ahead and top stitch all across that top edge, and then we'll add it to the lining piece. When I top stitch, I just do 1/8 of an inch away all the way across. After you've top stitched to the top of this, then you're just going to pull out that lining piece. The pattern tells us how far down we attach the pocket. You're just going to lay it on top. And I have it marked with clips how far down I'm going to attach it. So now that I have the pocket where it needs to go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of stitches to separate this pocket. If you don't do this, it will have some gapping whenever you have the bag finished. It's a very big pocket. So for me, I'm definitely going to make some segments. I think I'm going to do 3. I'm going to do 2 smaller ones on the side and then have kind of one larger one in the middle. I have not sewn the bottom yet of this pocket, so it doesn't matter too much if I'm starting at the top or the bottom with adding these rows of stitching. Here's my first division. Let's go and make another one right in the middle here. Like I said, I wasn't too worried about making mine symmetrical. I just wanted to get a couple to kind of help have some extra organization inside, but also so that whenever I look inside the bag, this interior pocket isn't gaping too badly. Now that I have 3 pockets for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the sides and across the bottom. The bottom will be a final stitch, and then the sides will just be basting stitches. Pull out the 2 D squares that you cut out from your, I think this is fabric 3 and 4. What you want to do now is you want to place these right sides together. I did add some interfacing. I added it on the back of both of these pieces just to give it a little bit more like stability, but I did use a lightweight, not a medium weight interfacing, so it's a step down from the SF101. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sew around all 4 sides, but I'm just going to leave a small opening there at the bottom so that I can turn this through. I'm going to use this seam allowance given in the pattern and making sure that I lock in the stitches whenever I start and end my stitching. I'm not going to trim the seam allowances, but I'm just going to trim across the corners to take that extra bulk off of there, just to help those corners poke out a little bit better. What I'll do now is I'll turn this right sides out. I'll use the stiletto to make sure I get really nice corners, and then I'm definitely going to take this over to the ironing board to press everything flat. So here's how my exterior pocket looks. What I did was I pressed everything flat, and then the pattern tells us to take the top and fold it down a certain amount of inches. I folded it down. I tried to make sure it was in line with that bottom point. Now what I want to do is I'm going to top stitch across this because this will be the opening to the pocket. You don't have to, but I'm going to. And I'm also going to add a tag. I think I want to add the tag actually down here. I thought about putting it up here, but I think if I put it down here, it'll look a little bit nicer. I don't know, I could be wrong on that, but I'm going to go ahead and add the tag and do my top stitching, and then I'm going to attach this to the exterior. Pull out your exterior piece after you get your pocket prepped, and what you're going to do is you're going to of course center it, and then you're going to come down a set amount. The pattern tells you how far down, and that's where we're going to place this pocket. So I'm going to do my measurements off camera, and then I'll come back to talk about how we sew this. Now that I have the pocket placed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch all around this square, diamond shape, whatever you want to call it, just leaving the opening here at the top, the only thing I don't stitch closed. The pattern tells us we can do 2 rows of stitches, so I'm going to do that. My first row is going to be right up against the edge, around 1/8 of an inch, and then the second one I'll come in about 1/4 of an inch, so 1/8 of an inch away from the first row of stitches. So I'm going to stitch around this pocket to get it ready to go. Before I start stitching this, I need to tell you something. I need to confess, I have not quilted this. I realized after I trimmed everything down, which really I didn't have that much room to trim on the top and bottom, I had a little bit of overhang on the sides, that I really if I quilted it, I would lose some of my size. I would shrink down a little. It would have been okay, and I would have been fine with that. I just decided that since I was able to fuse my foam on, it's really solid, it looks good. I thought, gosh, I don't want to mess it up with my not the best stitching and not the best quilting, and I thought I'm just going to leave it. But if you have not quilted yours, I would quilt before I trimmed, and then I would add the pocket after that. One of those things where you may want to do differently than what I did and take care to do this the proper way. So is mine typically a quilted bag? Somewhat, but I still think it looks great. Just a personal preference. At this point, we're going to start treating this just like a typical tote now that we've got everything done. So I went ahead and cut out the bottom corners. The pattern tells you how big of a square to cut out of the bottom. I did this on the front, the back of the exterior, and the lining. Now this pattern is a birthed bag, but I prefer to sew things like this as a drop-in lining, just a personal preference. So what I did on the back of both the exteriors and the linings is I drew a line. Now it doesn't really matter how far down you draw this line as long as it's consistent on all of them. I did do a 1/2 inch, which means after I sew this together, I'll just fold down this exterior to that line. You don't even need the line. You could eyeball it if you want. It just is kind of helpful as a guide. You can definitely follow the pattern though and sew this as a birthed bag. It's kind of whatever preference you have. But now at this point, the next thing to do will be to place these exteriors and your linings. We're going to do this all the same way. You're going to place them right sides together. You're going to match up your tops, your bottoms, your sides, get everything all clipped around, and then we're going to sew this with the seam allowance given. Please note the seam allowance on this step as a little bit larger. If you have any gapping or anything, like if you have overhang, just try to match it up the best you can. It's not too big of a deal. You can always trim it down and get everything to match up. So let's sew the sides, both sides, and along the bottom. We are not sewing anything on the box corners just yet. I have the sides and the bottom sewn. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick my hand inside to kind of separate these two pieces, and that is how we're going to get that corners boxed. So what you do is after you get it kind of opened up, you just pull those corners and you match up the seams. So you can see how it's kind of puckering there. So when I open it up, that will allow it to lay flat. And then I actually can just push it all down and make sure everything lines up seamlessly. I'll stick my finger in here to smooth it out. And I'm going to put another clip down here on this side, even though I'm not sewing there. That will help it just to hold the right shape, because we really want to make for sure that we stitch across. I'm using my fingers to feel that the two seams, this seam and this seam on the back, on the bottom there, are kind of lined up and on top of each other. And you can see this is a straight stitch. That's what I want to do. I want to sew straight across here. So that is how that looks, really nice and straight. I'm going to repeat those steps on the other side for boxing the corner, and then I'm going to do everything again on the lining. And that will have everything ready for our next step. But before I do all that, I want to talk about the strap. We have these B pieces that we had sewn together. Now the pattern tells us to fold these right sides together, sew down this edge, kind of creating like a tube, and then you will turn it right sides out. That is a great way to do it, no problem at all. When you do it that way, the pattern does tell you need to interface. Well, I'm choosing to do mine a little differently, not because I don't like the way the pattern is doing it, but because I am low on interfacing, but I'm very high on this red webbing. So what I'm going to do is not interface my piece. I've folded the raw edges to the middle, And then what I'm going to do is just lay down this webbing and sew it on. This webbing will provide enough stability and support for this strap so that I don't have to worry about it feeling too flimsy or anything like that, and it'll still look nice and have a nice look on it. Sometimes you have to do what's best for your sewing room. This is just what's going to work best for me today. One thing I will do is I'll top stitch before I add the webbing 1/8 of an inch away. You can see when I put this webbing on that my strap is going to be, or the fabric I should say of the strap, is going to be hanging over. That's fine. I'll actually like that contrast, and so I'm completely okay with that, but I do want to kind of have the sides secure so they feel a little bit better and they're not just kind of loose or anything like that. After I have 1/8 of an inch sewn down these sides, then I will add the webbing. I will just sew 1/8 of an inch down each side of the webbing. So whenever I flip this over, there will be 4 rows of stitching here. This is the way I'm going to secure my strap. I'm going to do this all off camera because it is not that way written in the pattern. Just know there are several ways to do a strap. Just find the way that's best for you. The pattern gives you one way to do it. That is the way they think it looks good. It will look great. But if you don't have interfacing or if you have a lot of webbing like me, you can always do it this way. I am ready to put everything together and to finish up this tote. So here is my exterior. I have the exterior still wrong sides out because I want to top stitch on this part. So I'm leaving it like this. I have it clipped down and I have these big clips because I kind of like them where this has some foam. Not only does it hold it really well, but it kind of helps compress it a little bit for that final stitching. So here is the lining. I have it right sides out and I have it folded down as well. Now it might be a little tricky for me to get this attached because my lining will be a little bit of a tighter fit, but I think I can do it. So I'm going to put the lining wrong sides together with this exterior and sew it that way. I also have my straps finished. You can see on the exterior I have the marks made for where I'm going to attach my straps. After I get these put together, I'm just going to slip those straps in there so that I can sew them that way and they will be attached. So that's how I'm going to put everything together. Let's go ahead and I'll speed this part up just so it's not taking so long. But what I'll do is I'll make sure I match up my side seams and then I will clip all the way around, removing some of these clips and just keeping one set. So I have everything clipped around, I have the handles in place. Only thing I have left to do now is to top stitch. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to lift everything up, slide it under my needle, and I'm just going to go 1/8 of an inch around. Now if you wanted to, you could even do a secondary row of stitching and go 1/4 of an inch around. I don't feel it's necessary. What I want to make sure is that my exterior is the main thing I'm seeing. I don't want that lining peeking out. It's not like it's a really big deal. It's just a personal preference there on that. So I'll start sewing, and you can start sewing wherever you want, and then just go slowly all the way around. When you come to your straps, just make sure that they are seated straight and they don't look like crooked. They might have a tendency to shift or twist. Other than that, we'll sew this and then we will turn the bag right side out. My Tippy tote is completely done. Now I do need to do some pressing, trimming up some threads, poking out these corners. Let me poke this out really good. Everything came together wonderfully. I feel like this is a great pattern for whenever you're wanting to do a really nice gift or something special for yourself. Here's that front pocket, really nice. Here's the inside, huge bag, great for travel. Got to trim those threads up. You can see the way that you stitch down the pocket, you don't have any gapping there. Love the way it looks, just beautiful. So thank you again to Sassy Sunflower for letting me film this tutorial. These fabrics can be found on their website, but you can also find them in many of your local quilt stores. On the website, she gives you options for all the different prints she has. Anytime you buy one of her kits with the 5 fabrics in it, you get a pattern with it. It can be the tote pattern, it can be one of the quilt patterns. Many options for prints and patterns, so you always have something fun and unique to try. Definitely highly recommend her materials, and definitely this pattern. It's just a fun thing to do, and for someone who's not a quilter, this was a great way to kind of remind me of quilting can be fun. Anybody can do it. You can get through it and have just a beautiful bag at the end. I'm going to put the links for her shop and her Facebook group and Instagram in my description so you can find all the ways to connect with her. And also today, I want to thank you for watching another one of my tutorials, and I hope that you're able to sew something up that's a little bit out of your comfort zone so that you can try something new, build some new skills, and just have a great product at the end. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.